Mzansi. Welcome back to Truth Report. I'm Heleen Boshoff, and today we're diving into a truly urgent and harrowing realities of persecution, civil war, and genocide, and what it means to stand up and do something about it. I have a guest with me today who has been on the front lines of this fight for decades. I'm incredibly honored to welcome Matt Chancey to the show. Matt is the Vice President and Deputy CEO of the Persecution Project Foundation. For those who don't know about the Persecution Project Foundation, it's an incredible organization that embodies the motto, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Since 1997, they've been committed to providing active compassion and spiritual hope to the victims of persecution and civil war. It all started back in 1998 when PPF's president traveled to war-ravaged Sudan to document the brutal persecution against Christians there.
It's so nice to be with you today.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Matt, shortly walk us through that history and the experience of your work with the organization since then.
Yes, well, the organization was founded for the specific purpose of documenting Christian persecution in some of the old frontline states. In fact, Angola was the first state or the country that interested our founder because he had been involved in supporting Christians who were being persecuted by the communist regime there. But when he started the organization shortly thereafter, the situation in Sudan blew up. There was a terrible civil war. There was a large Christian indigenous population there that was targeted by the Islamist regime in power, the same regime that stayed in power for about 30 years and was filled with war criminals. Some of the first indictments from the International Criminal Court came against Sudan's leadership during that time. The country was put under sanctions by the United States and other world powers. And there were millions and millions of people, many, many Christians that were targeted and killed during that war. So my exposure to that conflict began in 2000 when I was invited to join the board of directors of the organization when we officially incorporated. And then 5 years later, I took my first trip into Sudan. So I've been traveling and working in Sudan for 20 years. In 8 of those years, we actually lived as a family in Africa, first in East Africa for 3 years, and then we transferred down to the Western Cape for the remaining 5 years. So that's my personal connection to Africa. So really, when I began the work, I was responding from just a request from a friend of mine who needed some help starting the organization, and I was moderately interested in the topic because I knew that, it's a good thing to get involved in helping people who are marginalized and persecuted, and particularly if you're my brothers and sisters in my faith. And so I kind of took it on as sort of a duty. But later, as I got to meet the actual community that I was involved in and making the relationships, and the people stopped being statistics and started being people, then what I realized is that I was making the mistake of having sort of an us versus them approach to charity or love, instead of just seeing us all as us. And so I kind of equate it this way. If my brother called me up and said that, hey, I got a flat tire on I-65, can you come and help me? Then I'm not going to say, okay, let me talk to my wife and we'll pray about it and see if we want to get involved. He's my brother. I'm going to jump in the truck or my bucky and I'm going to head out there and I'm going to help him because he's my brother. And that was sort of the mental shift in my mind. So I began to really identify with this community as part of my community. So we would say use your community to serve their community, just to try to bridge the divide. But really, there's just one community. And that's how I eventually just began looking at it. So that's how I got involved. And so my first trip to Africa, I got the Africa bug. And I've never looked back.
Once that tick gets you,
you're gone. You're gone.
Oh, that's amazing, Matt. So you've now come from a visit from Stanford.
Yes, right.
So you've
the center of the universe.
You know our shores. But
yes.
What brings you to Cape Town this time around?
Well, I have family here. So One of our kids married a local girl and settled, and they now live in Cape Town. So I get to come and visit, and I try to do that as often as I can. And I also have dear friendships that we made over several years, and it's always good to reconnect. But I'll tell you, I'm concerned about South Africa. Obviously, people here are concerned about the direction the country is taking, not just internally, but through its foreign relations as well. And so, in my own capacity, having worked in totally failed states, verifiably failed states, I see a lot of the warning signs in South Africa. And so whatever capacity that I can be involved in to call attention to that and just do whatever I can as an individual, I certainly want to do that. And so those factors keep drawing me back. So I never really left. We left South Africa in 2018, resettled in my hometown in southeast Alabama. But we've always kept very strong ties. And in this country, I don't know, and everybody who comes here will tell you, it just keeps pulling you back.
Absolutely. So how would you define South Africa's humanitarian outlook in those specific words, considering our high levels of violent crime, murder, rape, gang violence, farm attacks, and simmering racial tensions?
It's deteriorating. It's deteriorating very quickly, and it kind of like it's slow. It's like anything. It's like it's a slow march, and then it's a jog, and then it's a gallop, and then it just spirals out of control. And you're getting close to that point where, particularly in some areas, you have no-go areas, like war zones, and where people are just do not go. And I was reminded of this. When you drive, something you just take for granted. This is the way it is. When you're driving on the N2 and you see the sign, high crime area, don't stop on the road, call this number if there's an emergency. That is an advertisement that's meant to just alert people, but it's also really sad when you have to advertise to everyone that you cannot control this. The government has not been able to get a handle on violent crime. And again, we're not talking about statistics. We're talking about human beings. So every act of crime, every violent act is somebody's life that's been shattered. And when you look at the violence in the murder rate in South Africa, it's something like 7 times that of the United States. Now, the United States has a reputation because we have probably 2 firearms for every human being in the country, legally or illegally. And so we have this reputation of being a violent or gun, crazy society, trigger-happy society. But when your country has like a 7-time crime rate 7 times, it just kind of puts it in perspective. And something that Rob Hershoff has pointed out when people have attacked the issue of the farm murders by saying, well, there's not many people that are actually killed. And he's like, okay, wait a minute. You apply those statistics on a pro rata basis to the United States, and that would be like several 100,000 farmers have been killed in the last 20 years in the United States. That would be a 5-alarm fire in any country. And so that is why it's significant and why really it's a problem that needs to be just tackled. But I think the government here, and I'd say the government, I'm thinking the ANC primarily, is not really focusing on that at all, because they just want to kind of sweep it under the rug, minimize it. And you saw this in the White House where when farm attacks were brought up, the rebuttal was something silly like, well, it's not just farm murders, everybody's murdered. South Africa is not just dangerous for farmers, it's dangerous for everybody. I mean, can you imagine putting that on a tourism brochure? Yeah. Come to South Africa. It's equally dangerous for everybody. So it's definitely a problem that this current government, at least the ANC's role, is not really taking it seriously, and that is creating a major problem for foreign investment. It's creating a major problem for tourism, because people will hear these bad reports, and if they've never been to a place like Stanford, which is beautiful and lovely and just probably the best place to vacation with your family, they will be turned off by the crime and say, maybe we'll go somewhere else,
Always on the statistical front, I find it very amusing when media publications debunk or whatever is being said about farm murders and the
Right.
severity thereof. But the crux is that there is never really a conclusive report or
Right.
statistic.
Sure.
So in effect, I feel like that's not debunking anything. That's
Right.
just really laying bare how we don't have enough conclusive studies or data on something so important.
I think you're right. And I think also they're also neglecting the particular type of crime, because there is a cruelty into a lot of this crime. There's a lot of people that are tortured, and nothing is stolen, but they're out and out hate motivated. And that is something that is oftentimes not given a lot of credit. Right. There's not that emphasis that would impel the government raising making it a priority crime, which is something the U.S. administration has asked the government to do. It's sort of a non-trade barrier to relations, is that if we want to invest in what you have, but if you're not even responding to one of these major areas of crime with raising it into a level of importance that it should be at, then how are our interests going to be protected as well?
I understand you've been quite invested in farm attacks in South Africa. Why is that, and what perception do you hold to the nature of farm attacks in relation to general crime and the mainstream narrative?
Well, as I mentioned before, that when you hear the rhetoric around the farm murder issue, it's tied to the land redistribution politics. It's tied to the racial divide identity politics, which is a very dangerous drug. But it's one that the ANC and MK and EFF have been it's a drug that they regularly administer. They self-medicate with this drug all day long, and it becomes a major platform issue for them. And so when you see this type of crime and you see what it has done to other nations, but on a much greater scale, then you know that you're on a bad trajectory. And so President Trump has been criticized for using the term genocide or referencing other people that have used the term genocide. But what you have to understand is that, genocide is not just one single event. Genocide is like a process. Genocide is a mindset. And that is something that gradually builds. People just don't wake up one day and say, I think I'll just slaughter this entire group of people in my community. They don't do that. There is a slow buildup, and then it just grows and grows. And as there is a crisis, whether it's an economic crisis or anything else, then those people become the scapegoats, and you just they become your main enemy, and then it just escalates and escalates. That's what we saw in Sudan, just building over time. They have something in Sudan that the government has been using against, say, the Christian minority called the law of the strange faces. One of the large minorities in Sudan, one of the original ethnic groups, is called the Nuba people. They live in a place called Southern Kordofan, or the Nuba Mountains. And these people are like what you would think of as sub-Saharan African. They're not Arabs. And so there's always been sort of this prejudice, this racial prejudice. And so and us versus them, exactly, we're back to that. And so they actually have something called the law of the strange faces. These people are considered not truly Sudanese, or they're second-class citizens, and so they're singled out for blame when things go wrong, or they're singled out for just persecution because they're not considered a part of the community. And that's something that when you listen to the rhetoric here, whether it's from Julius Malema, singing "Kill the Boer," it's just a struggle song or something. No, what it is you're further dividing the community between the us versus them, and when they become a them, then that's when you start to see this rising crime that is not so much just wanting to steal to take stuff, but steal to hurt, steal to inflict pain, steal to humiliate, or commit crime to humiliate. And that's kind of what we're seeing and develop in South Africa, and why people are raising I think, like Ernst Roots and others, going to the United States to raise the alarm, is because that kind of rhetoric is not notching. It's not going down. It's not when President Trump started mentioning "kill the Boer, kill the farmer," it didn't result in Julius Malema saying, "Okay, I'll stop." No, he just, everywhere he's going now is "kill the Boer, kill the Boer," and so it's just it's just escalating. And as you see the state institutions and municipalities failing, there's going to be more blame shifting by the perpetrators, because they want to deflect all of the heat that's coming on them. Who are they going to go to? they're going to go to the people that they always attack. So you're only going to see this escalation. And I think that I saw this in Sudan over 25 years. I was in Darfur during the genocide when that took place. We were working in a refugee camp there for many years. I saw the results of this kind of rhetoric. And so when I come down here and I hear the same rhetoric, it begins to worry me.
Like from 1 to 10, how much does that worry you?
Well, right now, I mean, I would say that it's 10 because not that things are as bad as they could be, because they're certainly not. But they can rapidly move. It all depends, things when if the power shuts off for 6 days straight, all right, then people wake up. It's kind of like if that happens in America, it happens 2 hours in America. People are calling, they're in the street, right? Because they're not used to that. Here you have had this sort of creeping mediocrity in your service delivery. So people are just kind of accustomed to it. But you can be pushed to a certain level, and then people get desperate. When people get desperate, politicians will take advantage of that and seek to blame, and instead of working for a solution. And I think that's where I'm hearing it. I'm hearing the same things, which is why I'm speaking up about it. Because even though we're focused as an organization in Sudan, South Africa is so important because as goes this country, it could cause a spiraling out of control situation in all your border states, because most of your border countries rely on you guys for food, for most of their the food that they consume, power, everything. So you guys, if you guys became a real failed state, it would have repercussions that would just ripple through the entire continent, not just Southern Africa, but the entire continent. And that's something that the U.S. and international communities have a vested interest to stop in whatever way they can. Whatever external pressures can be applied in order to prevent that from happening, that needs to be looked at. However, I will say this, ultimately, at the end of the day, the problems have to be fixed here by the people here. And I think that the Trump administration, from what I can tell, definitely understands that. But at the same time, Trump is not going to wait until, as I mentioned in my article I wrote, he's not going to wait until the ovens are lit before he starts using the word genocide or pointing it out, because he knows that you've got to nip this in the bud early. And I will tell you the truth, that if people in Sudan and in places like Rwanda had a Donald Trump in office calling this out 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, they would have been grateful for someone like that to call attention to it. So we can poke fun at him. The media here can make fun of him and criticize him. But at the end of the day, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, people are going to say he was one of the few international leaders that saw it coming and was willing to call it out. I pray I'm wrong, but I've seen this before, and you guys are well on that track.
We all pray. It doesn't. Yeah. I'd like to show you this video that I've come across.
Me, I'm ready for war. Me, I'm ready for war. Let's go with them to war. We can't shrink ourselves with 7% population of white people. We are 93%. They are 7%, these white creatures. And they're here to demand a king like me, telling me what the fuck to do. We're glitchy, man. We're glitchy. You tell me what look around, we are seated. People have no jobs. Look around. We're still waiting for these creatures to give us economy. My father, Chrisani, was fighting for the economy. What the fuck is the economy? How do you run the country without printing your own money? How do you run the country without owning a bank? How do you run a country without owning the minerals?
So I'll stop it right there. This round, it's quite a tirade.
Right, I can tell.
And
right.
So he claims that Chris Hani was his father, but that is not yet verified. We cannot say that for a fact. So looking at footage like that, what does that invoking you?
Well, it would just having seen it for the first time, it goes to exactly what we were just chatting about. This rhetoric didn't come out of nowhere. It's revolutionary rhetoric. It's something that many of your top politicians, they use this kind of rhetoric when they're talking to their own constituents. Now, when they're in the White House or they're in front of the cameras of the BBC or whatever, oh, no. Right. But when it comes to the rallies where their people are, this is how they get people worked up. This us versus them kind of thing.
Even in Parliament.
Right.
We see that.
And even despite all of the data that we have showing that all of the Black empowerment has pretty much gone to enrich 100 top families, Black families, and all the rest have been left out. And that is they're doing. That is these families doing. It's not the fault of the 7%, right? It's the fault of those who have been running the government for the last 30 years. But they're not going to take responsibility for that. What are they going to do? They're going to shift the emphasis onto the minority. Now, when the president of the United States sent sort of his list of demands, not really demands, but this is like, if you want us to invest, then these things have to be fixed. You've got to exempt American countries from BEE, because why would we come in and lose 30% of our investment just like that? Secondly, you have to raise the farm murder or rural crime to a priority crime. Such an easy thing to do, by the way. Dealing with the DEI issue, just removing those barriers that would protect in the American investment. So yeah, expropriation without compensation. That was what I was trying to think of. Because why would you invest billions of dollars into a country only to have it rug pulled by some bureaucrat or some powerful family in the government? So those are very, very achievable things. And that is something that could be done by a government that was actually looking at the interest of all of its citizens. And that is not what you're hearing from the ANC or any of the other parties that are refusing to even listen to this kind of suggestion. And the reason is because and I think the ANC Secretary General mentioned this when he was presented with this list. He's like, look, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but what he said was the ANC is a revolutionary party, right? So if the revolution ends, we disappear. We have to keep the war going. There has to be a struggle. There has to be a crisis. There has to be a war. War is the health of the state, right? War is the conflict that us versus them is what's keeping. That's the only thing we know how to do. And this is not just something that's an ANC issue. Again, we see this in Sudan. Places like Sudan, where you had coalitions of revolutionary parties that came together to overthrow the established order. And then once they did, they had to now govern. And they didn't know how, because all their unity was focused on overthrowing something. It was a revolution, but no one was focusing on government. So then the thing in South Sudan, it just fractioned into like a civil war shortly after they won their independence, because they were all revolutionary parties, not governing parties. So the ANC had 30 years and there's still the revolution. There's still the struggle. Why? You've controlled the government for 30 years until recently. What did you use that time for, right?
Instead of graduating the cause and rebranding and redirecting.
Right, which many parties have done,
Which is
they've
necessary.
Shifted. You have to do that, exactly.
When you look at South Africa's high crime rates and politically motivated violence, do you believe the international community, including Western governments, is doing enough to acknowledge or address it, apart from the U.S.?
Apart from the U.S., no. I think that is something the international community needs to really take a serious look at. They are very happy to speak about other crimes against humanity in other parts of the world or crimes against populations. But when it comes to South Africa, it's almost as if you get a free pass. And because you don't hear the British saying much about it, you don't hear the Dutch saying much about it, you don't hear the Germans saying much about it. They may think it, but they don't say it. It's almost like they still think that the ANC is the party of Mandela, that they're looking at the Rainbow Nation, they're hearing that rhetoric, they're kind of like trapped in this, this cryogenic state in 1994. It's all kumbaya and everything. They haven't really been paying attention to what's happened over the last 20 years, particularly in this country. And so, again, this is an example where Donald Trump, you love him or hate him, fact is he is saying what has been needed to be said for decades and has not been said. And that's why AGOA had to go, for example. That's why it was going to go anyway, because Trump wants to treat every nation as an individual. He's not doing this broad brush approach. He's looking at each relationship and saying, okay, how do we make one that works here? How do we make one that works here? What that does is present an opportunity for South Africa to speak for itself, to not be lumped in with everybody else. It's like this poor, unfortunate country that needs special favors. No, Trump is actually, with the elimination of AGOA, he's actually treating South Africa as a peer. He's like saying, you're a country, I'm a country. You got stuff, I got stuff. Let's see if we can get together, right? So that presents an incredible opportunity that we haven't seen in decades, because people have just been riding that AGOA train, and just that's become sort of a dependency. And when it was going away, everyone is like, oh, the Americans are punishing us. No, they're not. We're actually this should have gone away a while back. This has created a dependency where you think it's an entitlement that the U.S., the largest consumer economy in the world, give you a free pass when you try to get a product in this country to sell, and there's tariffs and VATs and all kinds of regulations because you're trying to protect your industry here.
Competitive.
Right, it's competitive, exactly. So why does the U.S. have to give a handout here? So it's Trump is actually, he's sort of like that parent who's kicking the kid out, who's been in the basement for like 40 years playing video games and getting them to in his pajamas or whatever, and they're finally saying, get out and get a job, be an adult, do what you're supposed to do. And so he's like, come on. So Trump is like saying, hey, he's like kicking you out of the nest, saying, fly or die. But he's not shutting the door. I've told this to people, and my perception of Trump is, he always has a carrot and a stick approach. He likes to lead with a stick. He prefers that. But that doesn't mean there's not a carrot there somewhere. And so a lot of times you have to get past that stick and look, okay, where's the carrot? Because he's not shutting the door on South Africa. I think when you look at like Ronnie Jackson's bill, the congressman from Texas, the sanctions are targeted, right? I don't think anyone in the administration wants to punish South Africa, all of South Africa. I think what they understand who the few who are holding the country by the neck. And so if this is, again, an opportunity for those interests inside this country who want to help the president, help the United States, or any other international player who wants to get into this country and trade, it's going to take the private sector, I think. It's going to take civil society groups. It's going to take regular South Africans to engage. You cannot wait on your government because obviously they're dysfunctional. They're not getting the job done. In fact, they want to align more to the east. So if your interest, if your business, if your community, your municipality, if you want to be more Western aligned, then you need to think of creative ways to engage with the U.S. specifically in this case directly and not wait.
I think it's thanks to delegations like the Afrikaner delegation or AfriForum or all the many other people who have traveled to US that have pleaded and say, listen, this is not a blanket approach. It needs to be targeted because this is not South Africa in general.
And they're threatened with treason for doing something like that.
Absolutely.
And they're your biggest advocates. All of them have been saying, don't punish all of South Africa for the sins of the few. Don't punish all the people, because the people that suffer the most, the people who form the base constituency of the ANC, the EFF, MK, the people that suffer the most, they're not responsible, for this in terms of making the decisions. But when you are desperate, sometimes, the promise that no matter how ridiculous the promise may seem, that's all you've got. And so there's a way that there can be direct engagement that I think needs to be explored. I think that is happening now because crisis creates this innovative spirit in people. Necessity is the mother of invention. And so what you have is people, the necessity requires that non-government parties in many cases engage. And so you had a lot of delegations that were non-government delegations that went over just to try to patch, whether it's mining interest, whether it's agricultural interest. And what that does is that empowers these non-national, non-government players. And I think ultimately that's the future. That's where the solutions are going to come from. I tell people that I'm very bearish on South African government, very bullish on her people.
So in your commentary, you've highlighted what you call a pernicious level of denialism among some South African leaders and media about the country's racial tensions. How does this denial, in your professional opinion, hinder both domestic and international efforts to address this problem?
Denial is just denying reality. You're avoiding reality. And the longer you avoid reality, you're not going to be able to change. So think about somebody who's an addict who finally wakes up one day and realizes they have a problem when they're kind of digging through their mother's purse to steal money. And they're like, wait a minute, I may have a problem. So they go to their mother and they say, hey, I think I may have a problem. I may be an addict. And the mom says, yeah, for the last 20 years. Because you don't realize it. So you have to really face reality. And when you deny it over and over and over again, and you get defensive about it, you begin to target the people that are actually making the accusations like there's something wrong with them, when actually they're the ones trying to wake you up and say, buddy, you've got a problem, but we want to help.
While there's still time.
While there's still time. And so the Americans are willing to help. Yes, we have a new foreign policy that is America first. But America first doesn't mean America only, because Donald Trump wants to make America great again all over the world by inviting the world to participate in what he calls the golden age, America's golden age, which means he's reindustrializing the country. He wants to make new bilateral agreements. That's why he's scrapping everything and starting afresh, looking at each country. I mean, these poor European countries that thought they had it made, and he's like, 30% tariff for you and 20% for you. And they're like, whoa.
Basically rebooting the global economy.
Exactly. He's readjusting, he's relooking at everything, but denial causes you to miss that opportunity. You're looking at the stick. You're not looking at the carrot. And so if you acknowledge where you are, and there are voices that will listen, then you can say, okay, where can we find common ground? And I think that our new ambassador to your country is going to be looking for ways to find that common ground. I think that the administration is always going to be open, but they have been very, very clear on what needs to happen in South Africa with the national government for that to happen. Now, and that has broad support among many interests, civil society groups, business groups. And so I think that there is a way forward.
I absolutely believe that, and also under the silent majority of South Africans.
That's right.
Like recently there was a survey reported where most South Africans, no matter who they voted for or what level of education, they do not support the Expropriation Act in its current form.
And they don't support, most of the EFF supporters don't support Kill the Boer as a totally legit struggle song. They think it's wrong. Many of them think it's hate speech. So what the crisis will do, hopefully, is cause some of these people to change their voting habits as a result, because it's very hard to break ranks with something you've been doing for so long and admit that this relationship, doesn't work anymore with this party. It takes a long time. But again, if the party keeps going this way, I think we've seen in the last election, the ANC for the first time going below 50%. That was a big thing, because that's like, you could hate Jacob Zuma for what he did to this country with the Guptas and everything else. But the one thing he did is he told a lot of people who traditionally vote for the sort of African nationalist parties, he told them, I give you permission to toss the ANC, because he did it himself. That's a huge mental break. And that could play big in the by-elections, and certainly in 2029. We'll see. But that represented a major shift. So the ANC is worried right now. So, but again, that necessity can maybe get that denial to go away. Think, slap, wake up. You need to change, or you're going to keep losing to these other parties.
We'll be holding our breath until then. U.S. President Donald Trump administration is discussing a refugee admissions cap for next year of around 40,000 for the coming year, with the majority allocated to white South African, according to 2 U.S. officials briefed on the matter. So how should South Africans view this, considering the volatile racial tensions in South Africa? I mean, does the U.S. know something that South Africa doesn't?
No, I think that they've been listening to the Afrikaans delegations that have gone to them and said, look, thank you very much for this. It's very not kind of you to offer this. Ultimately, though, we don't want to leave. Africa is our home. This is our home. We don't want to be refugees. So the cap is a way of that I think that might actually have something to do with it. That, yes, this is for the hard cases. We have this amount, the really hard cases. But ultimately, it's a signal from the administration, in my mind, that they want to work on fixing the problems here. And that's a good thing, because nobody should have to leave this place. I would never want to leave here if I grew up here, for sure. So this is a signal from the administration that they're taking seriously fixing South Africa's problems within. But again, that's going to be on you guys. So you're going to have an ally. If you want to fix these problems and are prepared to be bold and stand up to the ANC and the identity politics, obsession with identity politics, then you're going to find a friend in the Americans, and you're going to find investment, and you're going to be better off aligning westward than you will going further east. But again, the problems are going to have to be solved here. And I'm very optimistic about the people here. The government's going to have to catch up, but that's okay. Let the people lead it, and I think you have a bright future. I'm optimistic. I'm not because I can see what the government is doing and say, oh yeah, you guys got it together. No. I'm optimistic because every time I come here and I meet South Africans, I realize, okay, you guys, you can fix this, but you got to want it.
Okay, a little bit more wider in Africa, especially on the Christian persecution side. So recent reports from organizations like Open Doors and International Christian Concern confirm that sub-Saharan Africa remains the most violent place in the world for Christians. Yeah. We've seen horrific incidents this year, like the massacre of over 40 Christians in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo and attacks by militants in Mozambique. Yeah. Given these escalating events, what is your foundation's strategy to respond, and what do they say to the South African public about the need to pray and advocate for their brothers and sisters in faith?
A great question. Again, this is where South Africa could play a really key role because this is a Christian country historically. Most people would identify as such. It's a very welcoming country. You've taken in many refugees from your neighbors, and you have the potential of being a safe haven for people who are fleeing persecution in places like Nigeria if they have to leave, but also being an ally, speaking up for the rights of those who are being marginalized and persecuted. But if you have a government here that is marginalizing its own population, that is playing this us versus them politics, one of the biggest problems that I have with South Africa leading the charge against Israel in the International Criminal Court is the hypocrisy of when you have overseen decades of just state collapse and the most violent uptick in crime that makes you're competing for the rape and murder capital of the world. You've turned areas in your countries into war zones, and yet you want to attack another nation for doing the same thing to elements to its people in this country. I mean, come on, really? I mean, it's just bad. It doesn't look bad optics, really bad optics, but because, again, going back to the people, because the people have compassionate hearts, because this place has such a stabilizing effect, as bad as it's gotten in terms of the state collapse of agencies and ministries, infrastructure, et cetera, it's still one of the best games in town. It is the best game in town, in my view. So as goes South Africa, goes so many other countries. So on the issue of Christian persecution or any religious persecution, a strong South Africa on this point would mean stability for the region as well. So again, this is another reason. That's just a collateral benefit of having a good relationship with the West, and also just being able to deal with the problems internally by facing the denial issue that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And I mean, the double standard that you see in outrage, I mean, the outrage is in the international community, heights to 10. But when it comes to Christian persecution, you almost don't see mainstream media reporting on it.
Yeah, Sudan is the scene of the largest humanitarian crisis in the world today. It has the most displaced. It's something like 12 to 15 million people have been displaced in the last 2 years, less than 2 years. 25 million face food crisis where they don't know when their next meal is coming. Our organization is running a therapeutic feeding program at 2 hospitals just in the Nuba Mountains region to try to save as many kids as possible, because they're losing up to 300 kids a day from what's called severe wasting, is when that malnutrition gets to the point where they can't even eat regular food. So you have to put them on a therapeutic feeding regimen to bring them back to zero so they can start eating regular food again. This is happening, and 90% of Khartoum has been leveled, this capital of Sudan, gone in the last 18 to 20 months. And nobody's talking about it. It's all the oxygen is being sucked out of the room by other regional crises, as bad as they are. But Sudan is a huge crisis. And talk about regional instability. When you have millions of people going to Egypt and Ethiopia and South Sudan, which is already a mess, and it's a huge crisis, and nobody's talking about it. But I'll tell you what another crisis will be if South Africa fails. If South Africa fails, where are people going to go? If you're having a problem in Mozambique, if you're having a problem in Zimbabwe, and there's some crisis or famine or whatever, where are you going to go? So South Africa is kind of a lifeboat, and has been sort of a lifeboat for many people on this continent, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. So again, this is why the international community really needs, in my mind, take it seriously, because we have to start talking about it now before it reaches that crisis point, because by the time it reaches the crisis point, it's too late. Our options narrow, and they're very expensive and very difficult.
Absolutely. Matt, it's been such a privilege.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for this opportunity.
And I hope you enjoy the rest of your trip. Matt and his organization embodies a powerful mission driven by the love of Christ, all about restoring hope and rebuilding communities. Like this video, comment, and subscribe to The Truth Report. To learn more about Matt's work, you can read his articles on Substack or BizNews.